Not being able to finish drawings is a really common problem. In fact, not being able to finish anything is a really common problem. The very first personality profile I ever did, which was like 300, what to my mind were ridiculous questions about do I keep my desk drawers tidy and stuff like that, came up with an assessment: you have a tendency to bolt before you finish a task. And I thought, how do they know that? From whether I keep the things in my desk drawer tidy. But certainly leaving drawings half finished for one reason or another is a really common issue for lots of artists. But we have to assume it's not what we want to happen, because let's face it, we wouldn't start a drawing if we didn't want to finish it. Every drawing we start contains at least the seed of a hope of what it might be at the end of the process. And so to not finish our drawings does end up being a negative thing for us. And it can even end up discouraging us to the point where we think, what's the point of starting? I never finish. But in truth, the reasons why any one of us can have trouble finishing a drawing can be as different as there are people struggling with it. But I think the easiest reasons to deal with are for those people where trouble finishing simply comes from poor planning and disorganisation, and perhaps being overly ambitious with what's been attempted to be drawn. Choosing subjects that are too difficult for my skill level, trying to draw them perhaps on too large a scale, which does require, I think, considerably more skill and more detail, and not allowing enough time to finish the drawings are all reasons why sometimes we don't get things finished. And more drawings get finished if we can complete them in the one sitting. So if you're one of the lucky ones and the only problem you have with completing drawings is poor organisation and being overly ambitious, then choose simpler subjects that you draw on a smaller scale and allow a reasonable amount of time both in your expectation and your schedule, and you should have no trouble completing drawings. One of the problems with having a whole lot of half-finished drawings lying around is who wants to take up a half-finished drawing and try and finish it? If I've abandoned it, I've probably already given up on whatever hopes and dreams and expectations I had for it. And if it says anything at all to me when I look at it, it's probably something that's not very encouraging. And so it's easy to understand when we do go to start another drawing session that we don't go back to a half-finished drawing that we left at some point because of difficulties we were having with our drawing or with our thinking. And instead, we'd rather start afresh. We'd rather think, this time will be different. I'm going to finish this one. I really like this subject. And this one may just well be my masterpiece. And then half an hour later, whatever, I have another half-finished drawing to throw in the pile that I'm not going to want to pick up when I go to start drawing again. And can I suggest the real problem when our drawing habits reach this point is the principle that in many different contexts I've mentioned in my videos, and that's that we get better at what we do over and over again. And that's why we want to be careful that what we do over and over again is helpful, because it will come easier if we keep practicing doing it. That means if over and over again I get halfway through a drawing and then for whatever reason I abandon it, I'm actually going to get more entrenched in that pattern of thinking, of operating, of drawing. And it's clearly a way of thinking none of us want to have. So it's really worth making an effort, trying to do some planning, some thinking to break out of a habit that's just never going to be helpful for us. Because if our reason for not finishing drawings is not poor organisation and being overly ambitious in what we draw, then it's going to be a more internalised reason. It's going to be something to do with our thinking, with our motivation, with our ability to persuade ourselves that this is a worthwhile activity for us to do. And clearly we're not starting drawings if we don't want to be able to draw. And so there's something in us, some positive thing that drawing is really going to fuel. And yet there's some other reason within us that's fighting against that says, no, it's not going to work out. This is going to be something that you can't do. And so we start to get a fear that in some way, for some reason, and these are all different for each of us, but we start to get some fear that somehow if I keep going, it's not going to turn out and it will discourage me. And none of us like that. And so at some point we think it's just not worth continuing. Sometimes we can look at our half-finished drawing and we can judge it harshly as well. And we can think that it looks nothing like our reference and that therefore I failed already. And so we bail. We think, no, I can't do this, it's not worth the time. And yet we still have this tension that we do want to finish our drawing because we wouldn't have started it if we hadn't wanted to draw it. And if in the end we don't finish most of our drawings, then we're actually reinforcing the thought that we can't complete them, that we can't do them, that we're even better off not starting to draw them. And I'm sure this is not true. So let me give you some good reasons to push through, some good reasons to think of when we're thinking of things that would tell us to give up and to stop, some other things to think of at that point. Some things that I hope will be encouraging for you to continue. And firstly is the point I just made. You can't judge a half-finished drawing. A half-finished drawing tells us nothing about how it's going to look at the end. And I know what I'm talking about because I've drawn thousands of drawings and every one of them was a half-finished drawing at some point. And I know that it doesn't tell me really how it's going to look at the end, because a lot of how it looks at the end is how I end up crafting the final steps of the drawing process. And I don't know even how to do that until I see what I've done and I start doing those final tweaks that really make it come alive. And when something in your head says, this is a waste of time, it's not going to turn out, it doesn't know what it's talking about either, because it can't know how the finished drawing's going to turn out. It really is bluffing. So don't listen to the bluff, but stay focused on how we're thinking, how we're hoping it might finish, because that's where we're taking it. And if we stop halfway through a drawing, we're actually stopping at the best part, or when the best part is starting, because the second half of a drawing is always more fun than the first half. The first half is always the most difficult part. We're confronted with a blank sheet of paper that's got no marks on it, so every mark we put on it stands out and glares at us and screams at us that it's not quite right. And we have nothing around it really to judge if it really is a good line or not, an accurate line or not, whether it's going to be a helpful line at the end or not. We can't possibly know at this stage. We have no reference points to judge it, and we only get those reference points, that context for these lines, as we add more lines to our drawing onto this blank sheet of paper, until we get to the point where there are so many lines on the paper that no one line stands out too much. And now we're starting to get a sense of how the finished drawing will be. And also in the first half, and particularly in the first part of the first half, we haven't warmed up. And I'm not particularly talking about pen on paper lines, although there is that, but particularly our hand-eye coordination. Particularly, we haven't warmed up our brain to be thinking about what do I need to look at in my reference or pull from my imagination and get it clearly set in my mind so that when I go to draw the line, I actually know the line I'm trying to draw adequately enough to be able to draw it in the right way, in the right place. I'm always struck by, even 5 or 10 minutes into a drawing, how much more confident and effective my line work has become. I've often thought it's a shame I can't start all my drawings now, and I guess I could do 10 minutes worth of warming up drawing if I wanted to. But I'm always struck at how my lines really do fall into a much more natural, easier pattern after some minutes of actually making them, doing them. And my first lines look very hesitant and scratchy and stiff in comparison, and not always as well placed for accuracy. But by the second half of my drawing, my line work has become much more confident, much more effective, much more accurate. And the sad thing is that if I were to give up at some stage in the first half of my drawing, when it can still sometimes with some drawings feel like I'm pulling my own teeth out with a pair of rusty pliers, then I never get to learn how enjoyable it is in the second half of the drawing when everything starts to come together. And if I haven't learnt to complete a drawing, I haven't actually learnt to draw. There are things about drawing I can only practice and learn and achieve with in the second half of the drawing. So if I've never got to that point, or if I haven't got to that point very often, it's another reason why I shouldn't be trying to judge my drawings and find them lacking. Because I haven't had adequate practice at the stage of the drawing, the second half, where we pull lots of things together and we enhance, we draw lots of things out of the drawing that make it an effective drawing. So instead of looking at half-finished drawings and somehow judging myself that I'm no good, I should get on with learning to draw and stop judging myself for having only half learned to draw when I've only had experience at half the drawing process. Let me tell you some of the things we learn in the second half of the drawing that we can't learn in the first half. Some of the things you're missing out on if you abandon drawings halfway through. Firstly, we learn that drawing, the second half of the drawing, really does feel easier. We're not just taking some YouTuber's word for it, but we actually experience that ourselves. We learn that it gets faster. Not just because we get more warmed up with our hands, not just because we learn to observe the things that we need to see faster to be able to draw them accurately, but simply because we have practice putting those things together. We draw with greater accuracy more easily and more quickly. And we don't get to experience that if we give up in the stage where it's still like pulling our own teeth out with pliers and we're still not sure we've got it right. If I abandon my drawing halfway through and never get a finished drawing, I don't learn through experience that so many of the lines that worried me when I drew them and against the blank sheet of paper seem to scream, I am in the wrong place and I will ruin the drawing, then in fact by the time the drawing's finished, I can't even see them, let alone someone who didn't know that I'd drawn it there. It's only by finishing our drawing that we truly learn that mistakes we make early on almost never look nearly as bad at the end of the drawing. And if I don't persevere and put correct lines over the incorrect lines, but still keep going with my drawing, then I don't learn that those correct lines will really attract the eye when we look at the drawing later, and the incorrect line won't be nearly as obvious. That our brain will always favour the line that's in the right place, the line that's in the place we expect it to be. And I don't learn, if I don't get into the second half of the drawing, all the little tricks that are available in the second half of the drawing to hide things that haven't turned out. The way we can put hatching over lines that aren't as straight as we'd want them to be. Or we can apply tone to hide other shapes or to change the proportions of them. Or that we can slightly increase the extent of foliage to cover up a mistake. There are so many things we can often do if there's something which at the end of our drawing we still feel is attracting unhelpful attention. But we never learn these tricks, and also how easy they often are to use if we give up on our drawing halfway through. We only learn these things in the second half of the drawing. It's one of the reasons you'll often hear me in my drawing videos pointing out mistakes I've made, lines that aren't quite right, because I want you to see that at the end of the drawing, they weren't worth worrying about. Although I did do one video that was going to be about drawing domes, and I made so many bad mistakes so early, I turned it into a video of how to hide our mistakes when we draw. So I do know what I'm talking about. It's not that I don't make mistakes. It's not that I don't draw lines at the wrong angles. But I've learned that as I progress my drawing, I can hugely, in most cases, mitigate the impact that it's going to have on the overall finished drawing. And that it's certainly not a reason to give up and to either start again or just walk away. Our drawings are transformed in the second half, and that's why we shouldn't try and judge them in the first half, because we don't have nearly enough to make any assessment about them. Now, I believe we should, in a way, judge our drawings at the end, but I don't mean judge in the sense of, oh, is this good or bad? I mean in the sense of critiquing. Has this worked? What parts have worked well? What parts aren't helpful for what I was trying to achieve? Because that gives us a focus for our next drawing. That gives me something I know I need practice in. That tells me that I should choose subjects where I get to do this again, and I can build on what I've learned and try something a bit different and work out a better way to create the effect I want. Judging is condemning and negative. Critiquing is educative and very helpful. And we have to keep reminding ourselves that when we're learning to draw, we're learning to draw. We're not producing artworks, we're learning to draw. And what I've learned is I've learned to look forward to the second half, because I've learned that's when things come together. That's when I start to have fun. I've learned that that's when I get to, in a way, solve some of the problems I've caused for myself with lines in the first half that haven't quite gone where I've wanted them. But I've learnt not to judge myself when lines go wrong. I've learnt not to say, this is hopeless, I've ruined this is a waste of time. I've learnt that by the time I get to the end of my drawing, there would be lots of options for me to disguise this, to draw attention away from it, or that it simply won't matter as much. And it's in the second half of our drawing, when we finish it, that we get to experience the rush, the joy, the satisfaction, dare I say, the pride in what we've done. Something that actually will encourage us into our next drawing session and will help fuel us to push through any problems that we might come across in that session. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I've never really had this problem with my drawings, but this was a huge problem with my paintings, and the principles were all exactly the same, except because it was oil paints, the time frame for each artwork was much longer. I have a lot of canvases stacked in a room with half-finished paintings on them, and they take up a lot more space than a half-finished drawing, let me tell you. But I learned in my painting to be patient with when it looked terrible, with when it looked like nothing. When I was laying the foundations for the second half of the painting, when I would bring all of those undertones and all of those whatever to life and would actually create what people would see. And because I learnt it with my painting, I already had that, if you like, confidence to push through with my drawing. So if you have a pile of half-finished drawings or a sketchbook where every page has a half-finished drawing, I hope some of these thoughts have encouraged you to push on, to start each session reminding ourselves, I'm learning to draw, I'm not producing an artwork. And my goal is not to produce an artwork, but rather it's to learn things that will improve my drawing. And I really wish you well with this. But look, whatever you're drawing and however you're drawing it, and whether it's the first half or the last half of the drawing, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.